The Detroit winter bit through Maya Rodriguez's uniform as she guided her animal control vehicle through the industrial district's maze of abandoned warehouses. The call had come in 20 minutes ago. A security guard reported a dog chained up behind the old Marshall paper factory. Just another routine check, or so she thought. After 6 years on the job, Maya had learned that in Detroit's forgotten corners, every day brought a new heartbreak. Unit 7 approaching Marshall's site, she radioed in, her breath visible in the pre-dawn darkness. The dashboard clock read 5:47 a.m., and the temperature gauge showed a cruel 12 degrees. Maya pulled her flashlight from its holder, its beam cutting through the winter gloom as she approached the warehouse's rusted fence. The security guard, a man in his 60s wrapped in a heavy coat, met her at the gate. "Found him during my rounds," he said, stamping his feet against the cold. "Never seen anything like it. Dog's got something about him, you know what I mean?" Maya nodded absently, already scanning the area with her trained eye. The beam of her flashlight caught movement behind a pile of discarded pallets, a dark shape, and the dull gleam of metal. As she drew closer, the shape resolved into a form that made her breath catch in her throat. A German shepherd lay curled against the building's concrete wall, heavy industrial chains binding him to a rusted drainage pipe. But it wasn't the chains that stopped Maya in her tracks. It was the dog's eyes. Despite his obviously desperate condition, those eyes held something she'd never seen in a stray: intelligence, training, and, beneath it all, a dignity that even misery couldn't erase. "Hey there, big guy," Maya called softly, approaching with the caution her training demanded. The dog's head lifted slightly, assessing her with a gaze that seemed almost human in its calculation. No growl, no cowering, just that steady, measuring look. The flashlight's beam revealed more details, each one adding to the growing knot in Maya's stomach. The dog's black and tan coat, though matted and filthy, showed signs of once being well-maintained. His frame, while shockingly thin, bore the muscular structure of a working dog. But it was when she knelt beside him that Maya made the discovery that would change everything. Beneath the matted fur around his neck, partially hidden by the crude chains, hung a weather-beaten tag. Maya's fingers trembled slightly as she brushed aside the fur for a better look. The metal was titanium, not the usual aluminum of civilian tags, and bore an emblem that seemed impossible in this desolate setting: the official seal of the United States Secret Service. "That's a military dog?" the security guard asked, keeping his distance but curious. Maya shook her head slowly, her mind racing. "Not military," she corrected, already pulling out her phone. "This is something else entirely." The tag's serial number was barely legible, worn by time and neglect, but she could make out enough. This wasn't just any service dog. This was a member of the most elite K-9 unit in the country. The German shepherd watched her movements with that same intelligent gaze, and Maya found herself wondering what those eyes had seen. How does a dog go from protecting presidents to lying chained in a Detroit winter? The question burned in her mind as she dialed her supervisor's number. "Sir, I need an emergency protocol override at the Marshall site," she said the moment he answered. "I've got a situation here involving federal property." She glanced at the dog, who had lifted his head again at her tone. "And, sir?" "You're going to want to see this for yourself." While waiting for backup, Maya began the delicate process of assessing the dog's condition. The chains, she noticed, were relatively new, probably stolen from a construction site, but the collar beneath them was professional-grade tactical gear, the kind that cost hundreds of dollars. The contrast told a story she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. "I don't know how you ended up here," she murmured, carefully offering her hand for the dog to sniff, "but I promise you, this is the last cold night you'll spend in chains." The German shepherd's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but an acknowledgement. Despite everything, he hadn't lost his training, his bearing, or his trust in humans. Maya's radio crackled with approaching units, and she saw her supervisor's car turning into the lot. Soon, this scene would be swarming with officials, and a mystery would begin to unfold. But for now, in the growing light of a Detroit dawn, she simply sat beside a forgotten hero, offering what warmth she could against the bitter cold. The security guard had disappeared back to his post, leaving Maya alone with her extraordinary discovery. As she waited, she found herself studying the dog's face, trying to imagine him in his former life, standing alert on the White House lawn, scanning crowds for threats, living the life he'd been trained for. The distance between that image and the present reality made her heart ache. Approaching sirens broke the morning silence, and the German Shepherd's ears twitched forward, his posture shifting subtly into alertness despite his weakened state. Even now, Maya realized he was responding to sounds with professional interest. Whatever had brought him to this place, whatever betrayal or tragedy had led to these chains, hadn't managed to break his spirit. Maya's office at Detroit Animal Control felt smaller than usual as she spread out the growing pile of documents across her desk. 3 days had passed since finding the German Shepherd, now safely recovering at their best veterinary facility, and she hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night since. The dog's tag number had opened a door into a world she never knew existed, and each new piece of information only deepened the mystery. Officer Rodriguez. Her colleague Tom appeared in the doorway with another stack of faxed papers. Got that classified file you requested. Had to call in every favor I had at the bureau, but... He paused, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. You're really not letting this one go, are you? Maya took the papers, her eyes already scanning the heavily redacted text. This dog, Tom, he's not just any service animal. Look at this. She pointed to a photograph paperclipped to one of the files, a younger, prouder version of their rescued German Shepherd standing at attention on the south lawn of the White House. The date stamp read July 2019. His name is Commander, she continued, voice thick with emotion. From 2016 to 2022, he was part of the Secret Service's Elite Protection Unit. 3 presidential events, 17 foreign dignitary visits, and... She paused, her finger tracing a line in the report. In 2020, he prevented what could have been a major security breach during a diplomatic summit. The photo showed Commander in his prime, 90 pounds of pure muscle and intelligence, his black and tan coat gleaming in the Washington sunshine. Besides him stood a handler whose face had been carefully redacted, but their body language spoke of a deep partnership. Maya couldn't reconcile this image with the emaciated dog they'd found in chains. Her computer pinged with a new email, and Maya's heart jumped when she saw the sender, d.chen at private.sec.gov. After dozens of unanswered inquiries to various agencies, finally a response from within the Secret Service itself. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you're inquiring about K9 Officer Commander, serial number SS-K9-2184. Please call me immediately at the secure number below. This matter requires urgent attention. The email was signed Agent David Chen, former K9 Unit Supervisor, retired. Maya's fingers couldn't dial fast enough. The line rang twice before a deep, tired-sounding voice answered. Agent Chen speaking. Sir, this is Officer Maya Rodriguez from Detroit Animal Control. About Commander. You found him. It wasn't a question. The voice cracked with emotion. After all this time, you actually found him. For the next hour, Maya listened as Chen filled in the gaps. Commander had been his partner for 6 years. Their bond legendary within the service. Together, they'd protected 2 presidents, thwarted countless potential threats, and earned commendations that remained classified. But everything changed during a routine security sweep in late 2021. We were checking the perimeter before a state dinner, Chen explained, his voice growing heavy. Commander alerted to something in the bushes. I moved in to investigate and... He paused. The device was expertly hidden. If Commander hadn't sensed it, but the blast caught me anyway. Lost most of my left leg below the knee. Maya's throat tightened as the story unfolded. During Chen's lengthy rehabilitation, Commander was temporarily reassigned to another handler, Agent Marcus Foster. On paper, Foster had been an excellent choice, decorated veteran, exemplary record, glowing recommendations. But papers didn't tell the whole story. Foster was hiding things, Chen continued. PTSD, drinking problems. The stress of the job was breaking him. One day, he just disappeared. Took Commander with him. The official investigation was cursory. Budgets were tight, priorities elsewhere. They listed Commander as retired and closed the case. Maya glanced at another photo on her desk. Commander in the veterinary hospital, receiving treatment for malnutrition and exposure. His eyes still held that same intelligence, that same dignity. But how did he end up in Detroit? Foster was originally from Michigan, Chen replied. I've been tracking leads here for months, but... His voice broke slightly. How is he, really? Maya described Commander's condition, his behavior, his unwavering spirit despite everything he'd endured. As she spoke, she could hear Chen fighting back tears. Sir, she said carefully, Commander hasn't forgotten his training. Even in that warehouse, cold and chained, he conducted himself like the professional he is. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Finally, Chen spoke again, his voice firmer. I'm booking a flight to Detroit. Commander needs to come home, his real home. I may have lost my career in the service, but I never lost my commitment to him. As Maya hung up the phone, she looked again at the White House photo. The redacted handler. It had to be Chen. The way Commander leaned slightly against his leg, the proud set of both their postures. Sometimes, she realized, the strongest partnerships weren't broken by distance or time or even tragedy. Sometimes they just needed a chance to find their way back to each other. The fluorescent lights of Detroit Metropolitan Airport cast harsh shadows as Maya paced near the arrival gate. Her phone buzzed with updates from the veterinary clinic. Commander was getting stronger each day, though the emotional scars ran deeper than the physical ones. The German Shepherd still snapped to attention at certain sounds, his training emerging through layers of trauma like ghost images on old film. Flight 2247 from Washington, D.C. has landed, the announcement echoed through the terminal. Maya checked her phone one last time, studying the photo Agent Chen had sent. A decorated veteran in his mid-40s, with kind eyes and a military bearing. But it wasn't Chen who emerged first from the jet bridge. Officer Rodriguez. A woman in a crisp suit approached, showing Secret Service credentials. I'm Agent Sarah Walsh, Internal Affairs. I believe we need to talk before you meet with Agent Chen. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Minutes later, in a private conference room, Maya learned the full story that had brought Commander from the White House to a Detroit junkyard. Agent Walsh spread photographs across the table, surveillance shots, medical records, and personnel files that painted a picture darker than Maya had imagined. Marcus Foster was one of our best, Walsh explained, her fingers tracing a photo of a younger man standing proudly in Secret Service gear. 3 commendations for valor, highest scores in tactical training, personally requested by 2 presidents. But combat trauma doesn't care about your record. The next photo showed the same man years later, eyes haunted, posture defensive. Foster's PTSD went undiagnosed for years. He self-medicated with alcohol, covered his tracks expertly. When Chen was injured, Foster volunteered to take Commander. No one questioned it. Their training scores were perfect. Maya studied the report dates, her heart sinking. But something changed. Walsh nodded grimly. Foster's mother died that December. His last anchor gone. The drinking got worse. He started missing training sessions, making mistakes. Commander knew. These dogs always know. He tried to compensate, tried to protect Foster like he'd protected Chen. The next document was a psychiatric evaluation, heavily redacted but clear enough in its conclusions. Foster was cracking, his judgment impaired by trauma and grief. But before the service could intervene, he vanished, taking Commander, his gear, and classified training documents with him. "We found the documents in a storage unit in Lansing," Walsh continued. "Foster had tried to sell them, needed drinking money, but Commander—" She paused, emotion briefly cracking her professional veneer. "Foster couldn't bring himself to sell Commander, said it would be like selling his soul." Maya thought of the chains in the warehouse, the cruel winter wind. So he just left him there? "Foster was found 3 weeks ago in a motel outside Toledo. He'd ... Walsh's voice softened. "He didn't make it. His last coherent statement was about Commander. Said he'd chained him up because he was too ashamed to kill him, too broken to keep him, and too selfish to let him go." The door opened quietly, and David Chen entered, leaning slightly on a carbon fiber prosthetic. His face showed every minute of the flight, every day of searching. Walsh stood, gathering her files. Agent Chen insisted on adopting Commander himself. Given their history and Chen's new role training K9s for PTSD support, the service has approved it. Maya watched Chen sink into a chair, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the warehouse photos. "I should have known Foster was struggling," he said quietly. "Commander would have shown signs, tried to tell me, but I was so focused on my own recovery." "This isn't about guilt," Maya found herself saying. "It's about making it right." She pulled out her phone, showing Chen the latest video from the clinic. Commander, still thin but stronger, working with the rehabilitation team. His eyes still held that same intelligence, that same unwavering spirit. Chen's breath caught. He hasn't lost it. After everything, he's still Commander, Maya finished. Still the dog who saved your life, who protected presidents, who never gave up his training even in that warehouse. And now he needs you as much as you need him. Walsh left them with paperwork to complete, but Maya barely noticed her departure. She was watching Chen watch the video, seeing hope replace guilt in his eyes. Commander's story wasn't just about one handler's tragedy or one dog's resilience. It was about the invisible wounds of service, the price of duty, and the bonds that survived even the darkest nights. Tomorrow they would go to the clinic. Tomorrow, Commander would learn that his long nightmare was over. But tonight, in a sterile airport conference room, Maya watched healing begin as Chen traced Commander's image on her phone screen, whispering words only a handler would understand. The veterinary clinic's rehabilitation room fell silent as Maya led David Chen through the door. Morning sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the practice obstacles and training equipment. A familiar environment for a K9 handler, but Chen's focus was entirely on the German Shepherd watching them from across the room. Commander lay on his bed, notably stronger than the day Maya found him, though still far from his former glory. His ears perked forward at their entrance, nose working the air with professional interest. Then something changed. His head lifted sharply, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent that had been burned into his memory through years of partnership and trust. "Hey, buddy," Chen's voice cracked, his hand gripping his cane tighter. "Remember me?" The transformation was instant and profound. Commander rose in one fluid motion, his bearing shifting from casual alertness to intense focus. Despite his weakened state, despite the months of neglect and trauma, the proud K9 officer emerged like a shadow lifting. His tail, which had barely wagged since his rescue, began to move tentatively. "Go ahead," Maya whispered, though she needn't have bothered. The bond between handler and dog transcended any need for permission or protocol. Chen took one halting step forward, his prosthetic leg moving stiffly. Commander watched the limping gait, his head tilting slightly as he processed this change in his former handler. For a moment, Maya's heart clenched. Would the changes be too much for either of them? Then Commander moved, his pace measured but deliberate. He approached Chen with the dignity of his training, nose forward to confirm what his heart already knew. Chen knelt awkwardly, letting his cane fall aside, and extended his hand palm up, the same way he'd done thousands of times before during their years of service. The German shepherd's cold nose touched Chen's palm, inhaled deeply, and something profound passed between them. With a soft whine that spoke of recognition and relief, Commander pressed his head into Chen's chest. Chen's arms wrapped around his former partner, and the walls both had built around their pain began to crumble. "I'm so sorry," Chen whispered into Commander's fur. "I'm so sorry I lost you." Commander's response was to burrow closer, his tail now wagging freely, years of separation dissolving in the language of touch and scent that had always been their truest form of communication. Maya wiped tears from her eyes as she watched Commander practically crawl into Chen's lap, all professional demeanor temporarily forgotten in the joy of reunion. The dog's transformation was remarkable. Gone was the wary, traumatized creature from the warehouse. In its place was a canine officer reunited with his true north, his purpose personified. Dr. Wilson, Commander's primary veterinarian, appeared quietly beside Maya. "I've never seen anything like it," she murmured, passing Maya a tissue. "His vital signs were always stable, but guarded. Now look at his body language. He's literally coming back to life." Chen had produced something from his pocket, a worn leather collar with a familiar gold badge. "Kept it," he said hoarsely, showing it to Commander. "Kept it all this time, hoping." The German shepherd sniffed the collar, his tail wagging faster as he recognized his own scent embedded in the leather. As Chen replaced the clinic collar with Commander's original one, Maya saw the years of pain and guilt lifting from his shoulders. The handler had been as lost as his dog, both wounded by circumstance and separation. Now, in finding each other, they had each found their way home. "There's something else you should know," Maya said softly, once the initial emotion had settled. She explained about the foundation being established in Commander's name, a program to track and protect retired service dogs, ensuring no other canine officer would fall through the cracks. Chen looked up, his eyes bright.